time when the good guys always won, and the bad guys were really bad. And sometimes the bad guys weren't even guys.
I must be dreaming.
If you're looking for the days when we had it made,
I'm beginning to like you, Mr. Bond.
look no further. Because Sean Connery is as good as gold.
Isn't it customary to grant a condemned man his last request? I think you've made your point.
Goldfinger. Next.
Welcome to the fourth episode of Pod Stallions, the official podcast of PodStallions.com. As always, I'm Brian, and with me is Jason.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're going to discuss something a little interesting for kids of the 70s. We're going to talk about Spies, namely James Bond, the Avengers, that sort of thing. And it's a bit unusual because really the heyday of Spies happened before Jason and I were even born.
That's right.
It was kind of old hat, but we both kind of have a love for it, mainly thanks to reruns for me. But we're going to get into Jason's love of it, which outpowers mine. I would say you are an uber fan.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a few times on the show about our collections. You know, you sort of have been this collector that is more sort of brands and properties, but it kind of is all over the place. A specific period, specific properties, companies, things like that. I kind of kept my collecting to, I wavered here and there, and I got things outside of these wheelhouses, but mainly by the late 80s, it was Bond and Indiana Jones, and I had these two collections that I was constantly picking things up, simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And so there was definitely a period in the early 90s where I had probably one of the biggest Indiana Jones collections in the country. I mean, I can't think of much I didn't have, and things that we were discovering through the toy shop and things like that. And Bond, I had mainly 60s and early 70s stuff.
Yeah, because there really wasn't a lot of, I wasn't tripping over James Bond merchandise when I was a kid.
No, and I guess that's a great way to kick it off, where the Bond phenomenon, James Bond, and those films pretty much kicked off the spy phenomenon in the 60s. And this is a nice sort of parallel to the episode we did on Doctor Who. It's kind of beautifully ironic that the Bond films, the character, just to give people a quick background, I want to say 1954, 52, 53, I believe, was Casino Royale, the first James Bond book that Ian Fleming wrote. There was a sordid kind of history with that title and trying to get things done with it. Eventually, an hour-long television performance was commissioned, a television series called Climax, and each episode was a different story, an adaptation of a book.
Like a Playhouse 90 kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And,
that doesn't help anybody. Sorry.
Right. Bring on the Fatty Arbuckle joke.
Yeah, I know. That's a 50-year-old show reference.
So Casino Royale was done in, I want to say, 58 or 59. It was adapted as an hour-long special as part of this series for television. And Bond became American. He was played by a guy called Barry Nelson. He became Jimmy Bond. He worked for the CIA. And Le Chiffre, the villain who eventually was played by Mads Mikkelsen. Actually, that's not even how you pronounce his name. It's like Mass or something. But he was played by Peter Lorre in this
that's cool.
piece. And it's actually not that bad. It's very dated when you look at it now. The best way to see it, years ago, was out on VHS. Not not a bootleg. It was kind of an official thing, but it was kind of hinky how it got released. Now I believe it is on the latest DVD of Casino Royale, the '67 comedy film, which is a whole other thing we'll get into in a minute how that happened. So obviously the rights for Casino Royale were very, very weird and tied up, where officially the Bond producers couldn't do anything until the Daniel Craig debut. So this thing is on television. It does nothing. Nobody cares. Disappears. And then it's kind of a long story how these two producers, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, got the rights to make features. And this has been talked about many times, not to put too fine a point and sound like I'm just regurgitating what others have said much smarter than me. I think it's beautiful that we're celebrating these two anniversaries. Doctor Who, 50 years this year. Bond was 50 years last year. The features. It's the most successful film franchise in history. And yes, we can probably put on paper the numbers that the Star Wars films have done and so on. But when I say successful, I mean the money that these films have generated, 50 years strong, all the different actors that have played them and so on. So the parallel with Doctor Who, which I'll just touch on for a second, both British characters, both inherently very British sort of institutions, and yet you couldn't find two characters further apart in the spectrum with their ethos and their vibe and their look and everything, completely different characters, but both very groundbreaking. The Bond stuff, and this is the bit that I'll get to that people have talked about before, very much like Ray Harryhausen. We were just talking about Harryhausen in Geek Shall Inherit, the other podcast that I co-host, who passed away this week at 92, 93.
Yeah.
All the tributes have been coming out about him, and everybody from Lucas to Peter Jackson to you name it are coming out and screaming about Harryhausen and his works and what he did. And it's hard to overstate just what he did and how many doors it opened for so many people in so many parts of the industry with his special effects work. How many people it influenced. Lucas made a statement along the lines of, we may not have even had Star Wars if it weren't for someone like Ray Harryhausen, and showing us that these things were possible, putting elements together on screen. Because the franchise is so old, and a lot of people, I meet people all the time that have never seen a Connery Bond. They love the Daniel Craig stuff. They've never seen a Roger Moore, whatever. Prior to 1962, the format for these films, what they did with Dr. No, producing that film, the format of it, the action involved with it, the seriousness, the sexiness, the music, all of that combined, there really had never been anything like it before Dr. No. It really set the blueprint for what an action film was going to be. And in many ways, we wouldn't have had Indiana Jones. We wouldn't have had a lot of what Spielberg has done. We wouldn't have had a lot of what action films look like today had it not been for Broccoli and Saltzman bringing this character to life in movies. And also, because the movies were so big, I'm sorry I'm going on here, but
that's all right.
From Dr. No, it went from Dr. No to From Russia with Love, and then to Goldfinger. By the time you got to Goldfinger, and I'm very much paraphrasing here, people can look up these facts, I believe the budget for Dr. No was $1 million.
It was a cheap film, wasn't it?
Fairly cheap for the time.
And they offered the role before Connery to Steve Reeves, didn't they? I heard that. I read that. I'm a huge fan of the Hercules movies, and I think one of the things they had offered Steve Reeves, but they didn't want to pay him that much, and he just went back to Italy and made more crap.
I don't remember. I don't know if I've heard that. I can tell you that Ian Fleming was very prickly about the lead, who was going to play Bond. The creator was very prickly about it. He did not like Connery, did not approve of that casting choice.
Really?
Connery, yeah, and Connery was a relative unknown. He had definitely done stuff, but he was not a household name. He was, they wanted an unknown. names that had sort of been thrown around were Cary Grant, David Niven, actually, at one point. And what's interesting is in the books, Fleming describes one of the characteristics that he gives to Bond is he kind of looks like Hoagie Carmichael, the songwriter and piano player. And Hoagie Carmichael, if anybody knows what he looks like, is sort of a nondescript kind of face, kind of handsome, but not even ruggedly handsome.
The only way I know Hoagie Carmichael is from the Flintstones. I think he was on the Flintstones once.
I believe he actually wrote a song that ended up in that episode of the Flintstones. That's right.
Yeah.
So Connery comes along, and he's, the way Broccoli described seeing him, I think from a window, they looked down on the lot they were on and watched him come into the building. And Broccoli described him like gliding like a panther. Connery had this way about him that just, there was something, and he was very forceful in this meeting, and they took to him, and he was rugged and handsome, but also, they thought he would look good in a tuxedo and prim and proper. I think Fleming pictured someone a little more smooth, a little smoother, a little more adult maybe, but he did not like Connery. Once he saw the film, he kind of fell in love with Connery, and ironically, in the next Bond book that he wrote, I forget the next one that he wrote after Dr. No, he went into Bond's background and suddenly traced Scottish heritage in Bond's makeup because of Connery being cast in the role. So anyway, so by the time you get to Goldfinger, the third film, I believe the budget was about $3 million. Now, picture this. A movie like Iron Man 3 comes out today. What is that? In like 2,500 theaters in the U.S. alone? Something along those lines? Tickets are average $10, $12. Back, in '64, when a movie like Goldfinger, came out, it did not even hit every state when it's released. I mean, it might have been in 25 theaters around the country. And if you lived in Los Angeles, for example, you were in luck because it would play in Los Angeles. But if you lived in Pasadena, or if you lived in, I don't know, Tarzana or something, you had to make the trek to Los Angeles to come and see this thing, which was a practice that the studios were doing even as far up as Jaws. They were doing it that way. So it comes out, and I believe, if I'm getting this right, it made its budget back in like 10 or 12 days.
Yeah, it made $51 million lifetime gross.
Goldfinger?
Which is crazy, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Now you do the math, go back in time and figure out what we're talking about here. It's really extraordinary just how much money these movies made. And I always say this to people when I'm preaching about Bond. The 60s really was the Beatles in music and Bond at the pictures. Doesn't mean there wasn't more stuff, obviously, but the Beatles were, everything they did turned to gold. I mean, every single, was going to number one and everything. I mean, the next, group down, as big as the next group would have been, were such a distant second that the Beatles they were God. And Connery and the Bond character were as big as you could possibly get at the movies. So merchandise-wise, 64 to 66, just like with Doctor Who, was this massive influx of merchandise.
And a ton of other spies.
And right, by the time you got to Goldfinger Thunderball, which was the fourth feature, the spy craze really started to hit.
They even put Connery's brother in a film. You ever seen that? Operation Kid Brother?
Kid Brother with Neil Connery.
Yeah.
You had spies on television. You had I Spy with Robert Culp and Cosby, and you had The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was hugely popular, and ironically, something that Fleming was involved with. He named Napoleon Solo.
Yeah, and because most televisions were in black and white, and I love these, so I collect these. They released color movies to the movie theaters.
That's right.
I think they did 8. I think about 5 of them hit the U.S., and then the rest were all popular in like the UK and Europe. and they're just hour and a half episodes of the show.
Put together. I think was one of them called One Spy Too Many.
One Spy Too Many, The Spy with My Face, The Karate Killers, and I know the reason I got into them is because one of them, and I think it's the Alexander the Greater affair, put into a movie. They added sexy bikini scenes with Yvonne Craig.
Nice.
So that's why I checked it out back in the 90s, and I've grown hooked on them. Warner Archive released those. They're amazing.
Oh yeah, the Burn to Order thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I should pick some of those up.
I have that set, just to interrupt for a second, and it's my wife goes away thing. There's a lot my wife puts up with, but 60 spy movies is not one of them.
All right, so this is a good time for you to come in now that I've sort of given the dissertation on.
Oh yeah, no worries.
And in case anybody out there doesn't know the story of James Bond,
yeah,
just in case.
You know what? It just shows your passion for the subject matter, sir.
Well, I mean, but there are people listening that maybe have never seen a Bond film. So he is what is called a 00 agent. He works for the Secret Service in the UK. He is a 00 agent, which means he has a license to kill or be killed. He goes on assignments. He drinks too much. He smokes too much. He is a killer. He doesn't always love what he does because it's a dirty job. And Fleming in those early books and the early films, they tried to get across that this is not. It's sexy and there's espionage and mystery and international travel and so on. But it's a dirty job that Bond has to do. He's good with his fists. He's good with his wits. By the time you get to Goldfinger and Thunderball, the gadgets start to come in, the cars do special things, and so on. Something else that's really interesting about these pictures, and then we'll go on to how it influenced the spy craze, because what you just said is interesting, because unless I'm mistaken, you don't own any Bond films on DVD, but you have these Man from U.N.C.L.E. ones, because there are areas of the spy you dig Bond, but there are other aspects in that spy craze that you dig more. Yeah. The other thing that's very interesting about these films, and one of the things that was so appealing about it, I believe, it's a theory, but I mean, people have really talked about it quite a bit over the years. You know, for a lot of people, going to see these movies and seeing these exotic locales that Bond would travel to, and these amazing locations that they would find for some of these films, a lot of the audience was never going to get to go to these places. And so, we're talking mid-'60s here, and it's, you had 3 networks in America, and I don't know how many films came out a year. To see a film, like a Bond film that showed you, Japan, that amazing volcano in Japan, or just the cities or whatever, your average moviegoer was never going to get to Japan. Or this may be the only footage they've seen of such a place. And it really was. I mean, we look at a lot of this stuff now, and it can be very dated. But, to see Bond, even in Spy Who Loved Me, walking amongst the pyramids, that's not CG. That's a big location to take this thing and put him there. So the Bond films were appealing for many, many reasons. But the main reasons, action, sexy women, a sexy leading man, for the women or for the fellas that like that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Great music. By the time we get to From Russia with Love, they've cottoned on to let's do a theme tune and have a popular recording artist of the day do that theme tune. I mean, so much of this set the blueprint for many, 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 many action films to come and how they're made. But Anyway, anytime something is huge and hugely popular, like a Star Wars, you're going to get imitators. So by the time we get to Thunderball, the world is rife with imitators, and that's where you come in, because you're real keen on a few in particular. We've already mentioned U.N.C.L.E., but you also really dig the Matt Helm movies, right?
I do. I was just going to say, as much as James Bond shows the pyramids and it's on location, every one of the films that I like, boy, Greece looks a lot like Southern California. So does England. It's just very clearly a picture of Greece, and then they're driving around Southern California. I I didn't like. We should probably go into how we both discovered or got into this stuff. And um, for me, I grew up not really. My introduction to Bond was long before or long after I had discovered Spies shows. I think the first thing I ever saw was like the New Avengers, which is the follow-up to the Avengers series. That was partially filmed in Toronto.
That's right.
And they're really cheesy. But there was a lot of science fiction in them, so I kind of liked them. So I think when I was 5 or 6, I began to, you role play, and I created a spy character, and my code name was Scarlet Red Rose. I remember that. And there was a popular tea called Red Rose at the time.
That's great.
And I took my sister's caramel leather jacket because I thought that was the coolest thing I knew, and I shoved a Western Derringer down my pants, and I went outside, and I was going to be a spy. And what stopped me was basically I stood there going, well, what do I do now? I had absolutely no concept.
That's great. You're like the kid who threatens to run away and gets out to the curb and goes, okay, where do I go now? Except you wanted a life of spying.
Yeah, if I could film a scene, it would really be, a kid dressing up, looking cool, and they're playing, loud music, and then he goes outside and goes, huh. And I think I just sat in a tree for a while. Because I really didn't have I hadn't seen a Bond film. I'd seen a couple episodes of the New Avengers, but I didn't quite get it. And
listen, as any good spy will tell you, every mission starts with sitting up in a tree.
Yes.
So you're on your way. Had you given it like another 20 minutes, who knows? We may not have been having this conversation right now.
But we were going to talk about merchandise, and that's how I got into Bond.
Which part?
Well, Bond merchandise. When I was a kid.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me jump back in here real quick. So let's go sideways just a bit here and talk about because you hit the Avengers and we're going to jump all over the place here because the timeline is weird. The Avengers was a British television series that actually, before we even got to Honor Blackman being in it, before Diana Rigg, her character. It was Patrick Macnee and another fella, not Ian Bannon. Ian.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I forget what his name is, but it was an offshoot of another series, but they were just called the Avengers, and it was before we even got to Honor Blackman, and it was pre-Bond. I mean, it really was right on the cusp of Bond starting to break. Honor Blackman becomes the first female character in it with Patrick Macnee. She ends up being Pussy Galore in
Goldfinger, right?
Goldfinger, which was a huge thing because the Avengers was a big series on British television, but it also was starting to break internationally, especially when Diana Rigg came into it. So for UK audiences to get Honor Blackman in a Bond film was a great, cross-pollinization or whatever you want to call it. Diana Rigg, of course, shot it into the stratosphere as a series, and it really went international. She ended up becoming a Bond girl as well. And just for the politically correct folks out there, Bond girl is just a term that's been used for 100 years now about the women that have been in the Bond pictures. It's not a lot of Bond is sexist, no doubt, but I don't mean it in a sexist way. They're Bond women, but they always have called them, James Bond girls.
Yep.
So you got Avengers on television, you got Man from U.N.C.L.E., you've got Matt Helm, who is played by Dean Martin, and those were books, am I right?
Those are books, and I was really into Matt Helm movies. I love them. They're campy, they're stupid. They really played Martin's persona, and I named my son Dean because I'm such a huge Matt Helm fan.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, interesting because. Now, we're getting into comedy here because, Man from U.N.C.L.E. could be a little tongue-in-cheek. Before Matt Helm was Derek Flint.
I think they came around the same time. I love Flint, too, James Coburn.
That used to be my I had an email account many, many years ago. It was JHL Flint because of our man Flint. People talk about Austin Powers all the time, riffing on Bond. I think it riffs on Flint and Matt Helm more than anything.
It steals. I use this as my ringtone. It's Austin's phone is Flint's phone.
Is Flint's phone, exactly. So Flint comes along, and Flint really sent up the whole Bond persona, where
it was a spoof.
It was essentially a spoof, and Bond was the guy that knew a little bit about everything because he's so smart. He knows wines, he knows diamonds, he knows, history, you name it. Flint, put him to shame. I mean, Flint knows everything. So then suddenly you go down this road of. It was interesting because you started to get this really everything. The imitators were there, and everybody was kind of riffing on Bond because Bond was the king. But they were doing it in different ways. Another one that's one of my favorite characters and certainly Michael Caine vehicles is the Ipcris file and the character of Harry Palmer that Michael Caine played in 3 different pictures. And ironically, the film, all of those films were produced by Harry Saltzman, not Broccoli. And Michael Caine, the character in the first book, in the Ipcris file, the book, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't even have a name. It's a first-person sort of thing. And Michael Caine helped come up with the name of Harry Palmer. And Saltzman actually sat with him and said, "Think of a first name." Ironically, think of a first name. It's got to be ordinary. This guy is going to be the antithesis of Bond. And Michael Caine said, "Well, the most boring name I can think of is Harry," forgetting that the guy he's sitting with is called Harry Saltzman. And Harry Palmer was born. And whereas Bond was, slick and smooth and suave and sophisticated and, tall and, could beat people up, Harry Palmer, played by Michael Caine, wore glasses, sometimes carried a gun, knew how to make a souffle, didn't always get the girl, and lived in a kind of a tatty apartment. And it was a very different sort of spy film. I don't know if you've ever seen Ipcris File, but it's a brilliant movie.
Not in years.
And John Barry did the music and everything. So you've got this, now even getting things like The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, with Burton. You get ultra serious stuff. You've got the ordinary stuff like Palmer. You've got the comedy stuff, the spoofs like Helm and Flint, and then the TV stuff. Now, we'll get to merchandise in just one sec, but go back to Helm if you would. Mm-hmm. What about the Mad Helm stuff and Dean do you find so appealing?
I just think it's wonderfully madcap, and I love kind of schlock.
Uh-huh.
And there's just something about these. These were, my mom defined them as, these were the Naked Gun movies when we were young.
That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
Because I was watching one once, and my mom said, "Okay, Matt's going to jump over a hedge here, and you can see that the grass has a trampoline in it, or a mattress in it." And she just started laughing when it happened, and she goes, "These were crap. We loved these." And they're just kind of fun and madcap. And I watched them in the 70s, I watched them in the 80s, I watched them in the 90s, and then I think in the 90s I went on a trip to Europe and I picked up a couple of Matt Helm books. I thought, these will be fun. And they're written, I believe, by a guy by the name of Donald Hamilton, who was just with us up until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, yeah.
And they are the most dry, whoever bought the Matt Helm movie rights never read a thing. Because Matt Helm, the only thing that's the same is Matt Helm is a spy. His code name is Eric. He does not work for something called ICE.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say his code name is Eric?
Yeah. And I believe Donald Hamilton is Norwegian. And
okay.
He is a World War II vet, former spy, a dry as nails assassin who has no time for women, has no time for drink. I mean, you read these and go, who thought this was a good vehicle for Dean Martin? But they just really, I think they just wanted to put somebody, they whoever the producers were, they bought these books. They're very straight. I won't call them boring because they're very popular books, and they're compelling pot boilers, as the Fleming books probably are. But there was probably nothing in the 1960s that someone said, well, we could make these films, but where's the catch? And then they attached Dean Martin to it and just made it a vehicle for Dean's persona. So there's shootouts in breweries, and Dean's got gadgets just like Bond in the fact that he's got a gun that shoots backwards or cigarettes that shoot people, you know.
I was just going to ask, there was some gimmick with the gun, and it was the gun that, because Flint had this thing that was this one, you know,
it was his pen or his lighter. His lighter could do a million things.
That's right. They were riffing on the Bond thing with the gadgets, and there's a scene in, I think, the first Flint film where it's like, you know, go down to Q Branch or whatever the equivalent was. They're going to get you all kitted out with these gadgets. And Flint comes back with, you know, oh, I don't need to, sir. I've got this. And he pulls out this lighter, and it's like, you know, it does 725 different things. And that's his one gadget throughout the film. It's like a phone and a stethoscope and shoots missiles and whatever. Then Matt Helm had the backwards gun.
He had the one gun that he fired, and he had to wait 5 seconds. So most of the villains would then point it to their face.
Oh,
you know, and shoot themselves. You know, he would click at a guy and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then, you know, just really ridiculous stuff. And he, you know, of course, he had a full bar in his car, and it was you know, they were playing to Bond's or to just Dean Martin's persona, and there was of course always a Frank Sinatra gag in there. Dean Martin Jr. made an appearance in one of the films. You know, as Matt Helm walks into a club in France, which looks a lot like Southern California, and this kid playing guitar goes, "Hey, Dad," you know.
Oh, no kidding.
And you know, of course, I think the first Matt Helm movie, the villain is Victor Bono. I don't know how to say that. Oh, and he's from Batman, and
he was King Tut.
He was Chinese in this, though.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and it is just full on, you know, the most racist Chinese makeup.
You know, Dr. No, Joseph Wiseman, a very distinguished British actor, one of the greatest voices in movies ever. He was basically playing an Asian character. Another couple of films that no one ever really talks about much, kind of hard to come by. Certainly, I'm not sure if they got a DVD release in the U.S., the character Bulldog Drummond. They brought him back in the late 60s, and he was played by a British actor called Richard Johnson. And there are I believe two features. The first, I forget the second one, but the first one was called Deadlier Than the Male. And it was you know, very Bond-esque, not quite in the Helm and Flint realm of humor, but definitely worth seeking out if no one has ever seen these. It's there's some good stuff, and it's grittier than you would think. So we're not around for the heyday of the merchandise. We talked about Doctor Who a few episodes ago, where you couldn't spit in the UK and not hit a Dalek toy of some kind. For Bond in 65, that was, you know, what 78 was for Kenner. In 65, you had Lone Star, which was I believe it might even be still around. It might be called Wick now in Germany. But Lone Star was a cap gun company mainly. They did other toys, but they mainly made cap guns and holsters and spy sets and things like that. We've talked about them before. They had loads of licenses in the 60s. I've got catalogs, which I still need to get copied and send to you. Mm-hmm. And the 66 catalog alone, they've got Thunderbirds. 67, they get Captain Scarlet. They've got Thunderbirds, Doctor Who, The Avengers, James Bond, Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Saint. Oh, The Saint as well.
Yeah, TV right. Series. He's more of a thief, right?
He's a thief, but he kind of goes into that realm of spying and that whole 60s era. And, of course, played by Roger Moore, who is that show was massive internationally before he ever got the Bond part. Was huge. So Lone Star had a bunch of stuff for Bond. The other two big companies, were Gilbert in the U.S. that did a 12-inch doll of Connery in different outfits, accessory sets, different outfits, 12-inch figure of Oddjob, figure sets, and by figures I mean non-posable army men style, you know, painted figures of all the characters from the Bond films, little play sets that those characters could kind of go with. Lots of stuff that Gilbert did. And then, of course, Corgi, which had to this day, has had a close to 50-year relationship with the Bond pictures. they did the first Aston Martin diecast, which sold by the truckload. They sold millions of that little Aston Martin car, which originally was painted gold. The first issue of that came out in 64, 65. As everyone knows, the Aston Martin, the most famous car in the world, is silver, the DB5. The first issue of the Corgi that came out was gold.
Really?
Because, and I forget the gist of this, but it had something to do with that initial testing that they did. It ended up looking dull, or something was off. I've got a Corgi book. I should look it up while we're talking to tell you what the reason was. But that started a long relationship with Corgi, and people, looking forward to a new Corgi car, diecast car, vehicle or something with every Bond picture that came out. So we're 45 minutes into this, and we're just getting to merchandise. We're not even born yet. Now we're into the 70s. And let's get to what your introduction to Bond would have been. You're not saying that you got to spy movies before you got to Bond, are you?
Yeah, I definitely saw.
Oh.
I saw.
How do you reckon that one?
I saw New Avengers and I guess A Man Called Flintstone before I saw Bond. I just never noticed Bond because I was very young.
Wow.
I was cognitive of the character, but unlike you had older brothers who could kind of push you into things that you didn't know about. I had a sister 5 years older than me. So if I wanted to watch National Velvet, there I go. Or, she was just not into that kind of thing. What got me into Bond, believe it or not, was that Aston Martin car. And I'll just back it up a little bit. I saw the Spy Who Loved Me had the sub car.
That's right. They had the Lotus Esprit. That's right.
Yeah, the car that turned into the sub. I saw that at a store, and I fell in love with it. I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
Oh, wow.
So on my mom's side, her parents would ask us, we'd get basically one present. They had my mom had 3 brothers and sisters, and they each had kids. So we were kind of less special to those grandparents. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There's a brood of you.
Okay.
So my grandmother must have asked my mom, what does Brian want? My mom asked me, and I said, I want the James Bond car. And I can remember this to this day. I opened up that Aston Martin on Christmas Day.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know what it was, right? Because I wanted the other car.
You wanted the Lotus.
I wanted the Lotus. I didn't realize there was more than one James Bond car.
Oh, okay.
And I can honestly remember also being 7 and completely diplomatic about the situation. Oh, thank you. It's exactly what I wanted. But, in my head, I was like, what the hell is this? So, and I was so confused that I played with it. You eject the guy.
Yep.
I thought that was James Bond being, shot out to get to the top of a building or something. I had no concept of this toy. And
that's interesting.
I think I read an article in Starlog a year later about Goldfinger and how he had a laser ray. And the science fiction of that made me watch the film.
Okay.
Maybe I was 8 or 9 at the time. And then what turned out was my father, one of his passions would be, spy movies, kung fu movies, and oddly Cheech and Chong movies.
Oh, that's weird.
Because my dad was super square too. I don't know. He just dug those. And he took me to those, which is another story for another time. But he would watch the Bond weeks. UHF channels would play all the Bond films, and they'd be kind of tomatoey. And there was a channel here called City TV, and they coincidentally, when I got into Goldfinger, they played all the Bond films. And it got me into them. I really loved the Connery stuff because of the science fiction flavor of it. And then
I can see that, yeah.
And then to catch Moors, you had to watch what we were talking about before we started recording. The Moors were more recent, so you had to watch the ABC Sunday night movie to catch those.
Okay, well there you go. Now we get to where I come in, and yes, you mentioned that two older brothers. We were definitely a family of Bond fans. My dad was a huge fan of the Bond pictures. My brothers as well. My recollection seems to be the ABC Sunday night movie.
Yeah.
When I think of that, I think of Bond. I think of the term parental discretion is advised.
Yeah.
And I think of the dulcet tones of Ernie Anderson, who was the king of voiceovers, but he was the voice of ABC for 20-odd years. And it was, tonight, the ABC Sunday night movie, Moonraker, Roger Moore is back. And he'd do this whole thing, and at the very end you'd hear, parental discretion is advised.
He was also the king of the Love Boat.
On the Love Boat.
Yeah.
For me, it was like, that was always kind of hinky. Parental discretion is advised. Like, what did that mean? And I knew as a kid, watching them on television, that it meant a bit of the violence, but it was very sexy. It was very, Bond and Connery, to me as a kid, was a very, very adult thing. It's interesting when you look back, and Timothy Dalton, who ended up playing Bond, talks about this in the documentary done for the anniversary, where he'd have people come up to him and in his tenure, and they'd say, "I can't take my 6-year-old to see Bond anymore," and he'd say, "Well, it's not for your 6-year-old. It was never for your kid," which is ironic considering the massive amount of merchandise that was made in the 60s. Aimed directly at kids. But to me, I would see those things on television and think, this is very adult. Like, there's sex going on here. I didn't even know what that was.
He's sexing her.
He's sexing her in his sexy way.
Yeah.
And, Connery was covered in hair. He was that hairy shirt off. So that was probably my introduction. My first Bond at the pictures, actually going to the movies, was The Spy Who Loved Me.
No way.
Yeah, and my dad took me, and I remember bits and pieces of it. Of course, by the time Moonraker came along, I had a bit of an education going with the television runs of the movies. I also remember on ABC. I mean, my God, Bond movies on average were a 2.5 hour, 2 hour and 15-minute movie, each one of them. When they would run it on a Sunday night, I swear, that thing would start airing at 7, and it wouldn't, because I'd have school the next morning, and my parents would be like, "You got to get to bed." They're like, "Well, no, it's not even. We're not. I don't care. You got to get to bed. You got to get up in the morning."
I'm pretty sure I never actually finished any of those. Like, because we'd been at my grandparents' house, and I'd watch the first hour, and then
they seemed to go on for 5 hours with the
Yeah.
commercials and everything.
Did they add footage to those? You know how they did with Superman and Star Trek when they played those on TV? They did? Are there TV cuts of Bond films?
I don't think so.
Okay.
They certainly had to edit them. But I don't think there were. But my God, they were. As I got more and more into Bond as I grew up and did the research and read the books and stuff, those ABC runs, when they got the rights for those movies, they brought in huge numbers for the network, because again, this is the pre-VHS age.
Yeah.
And if you didn't see it at the movies, you had to see it on television. So through my brothers, I began to understand who Connery was. Now, quick side note, I think of Bond, I think of ABC, I think of Roger Moore. That he was my Bond in the 70s, of course. The Aqua Velva Bond, as I like to refer to him. And we had an album that was called The Incredible World of 007. I didn't know until I got much older that was actually a limited album that came out to tie in with an ABC special called The Incredible World of 007, which sort of, and it ended up being on one of the DVDs, either Goldfinger or Thunderball. I think it was a special done to promote Thunderball, and it mainly covered the first 3 films. But it was sort of a mini soundtrack, and it picked up different instrumental things from different films. I played this thing till it wore out. In fact, I still have it. And several years ago, my buddy Ben Harris burned it, because you can't get it on CD. He burned it to CD for me, and it's all scratchy. And I have it, it's in my iPod now, and it's the only version of the theme is on there and different themes, but this is the only way to have gotten these versions was this particular album. So I played this thing to death, and I remember flipping it over. The cover is amazing. It's this amazing, very 60s design of a gold ball kind of floating in this weird, trippy art collage or piece, and it just has 007 all over this big gold ball kind of floating on the cover. When you flip it over, there's a series of black and white pictures on the back, and it's Connery. And I remember being confused by who this guy was on the back of this record, because Roger Moore was James Bond to me, really. And then I started to get the education from my brothers. And Connery was still, Moore was the guy, and Connery was still a bit hard for me to take as a kid, kind of.
Funny, eh?
My head was really done in by Lazenby.
That one confused me too as a kid.
When On Her Majesty's Secret Service aired for the first time, I really did not know what to make of it, or who he was, or how this thing happened.
So, one of the things that I wanted to point out was I find it funny how by the more years, things were starting to look a little bit like a Matt Helm film on Bond. Like, there's a lot of camp introduced by that point.
Well, and I think that maybe what sort of freaked me out a bit as a kid, and when I say kid, I mean 8, 9, 10 years old, discovering the world of Connery, because it was not campy. I mean, there was some humor, definitely, and a lot of winking. But by the time you got to Roger Moore, I remember being 9 years old, seeing Moonraker, laughing hysterically at the antics of Jaws and that Swiss Miss girl with the pigtails.
Oh boy, yeah.
And I remember distinctly walking to the car afterwards. My dad, my brother Gino, and my brother Jack, and Gino just laughing and going, "Come on, man, what's with the girl and the Jaws?" He was really ripping it apart. Like, what happened to these movies? But I loved it because I was a little kid.
There's a scene in Moonraker where Jaws lunges at James Bond like a Scooby-Doo monster. Like, he's got his hands up and he's like lumbering slowly, and it's like I was at 35 watching it, but it was just like, what is this?
Well, remember, this is Roger Moore. Like, I don't want to take anything away from Roger Moore. He was a genius. He was brilliant for what he did. And he's a very, very gentle soul of a man, and was not comfortable with a lot of the violence. If you look at his first couple of films, Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun. Oh, quick side note. That's the other thing, was the Beatle connection. McCartney and Wings, Paul McCartney and Wings, officially, did the theme to Live and Let Die.
Right.
So that was a big deal. That was, for a long time, that was my favorite Bond film as a kid because of that song. Having Wings' greatest hits and a connection with the Beatles just blew my little mind. If you look at his first couple of films, there are a couple of scenes that are written that very much feel like they're Connery scenes, but they're, Roger Moore's, trying to smack a woman around, Maud Adams. And it just doesn't quite work. There's a scene in For Your Eyes Only, one of the best scenes in the film, because that was the one where they brought it back down to earth, so to speak, and actually, after Moonraker, where it got too silly, they said, let's make a straightforward spy adventure, For Your Eyes Only, where he chases the guy up the hill in the car, shoots him, the car is teetering on the brink, and he says a few quips and kicks the car over the cliff and kills the guy. They really had to convince Roger Moore on the day to kick that car. Like, he was completely against it and did not want to do it. So he was the guy that he always made the joke, like, how is it every bartender in the world knows what James Bond drinks, what's his favorite drink is? He's supposed to be a guy undercover. Everyone knows who he is. So Moore found the humor in it, and because of that, and because he was so popular, took the humor very, very far, to the point where by the time he got to his last picture, it was just...
He would also take a piss out of himself, because he would, like, his character in Cannonball Run is just a complete, basically, mockery of Roger Moore and James Bond.
Yeah, I mean, talk about, I don't know how much more meta you can get with this, where Roger Moore is playing a guy who thinks he's Roger Moore,
Yeah.
playing James Bond. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So yeah, he really saw the humor, and he's a goofball, and it just got completely silly. But let's get back to toys real quick, because we're both toy guys and people like hearing this stuff. So we talked about Doctor Who, where these kids that are into this particular subject matter can't find any toys. We talked about Star Wars and how at different times, because of our exposure, we eventually found certain things and picked them up. I mentioned in the Star Wars episode that there was a store in the Maplewood Mall called Kids, where I got my next two action figures after the early bird kit, Han and 3PO.
Yep.
Just like you, it was a birthday sort of thing. I had some birthday money. I'm guessing it was 7th or 8th birthday. And one of my brothers took me to the Maplewood Mall. I went right to Kids, and I picked up an Aston Martin and the Lotus. So I got like two in one go.
Cool.
And the Aston Martin is one of the greatest single toys ever made.
I still have mine, by the way.
I still have mine, and it breaks my heart, because I could spend a whole episode just talking about the stuff I did collect and how much stuff I did have. And I had the original issue of the Aston Martin, but the best Aston Martin really was the one right before the ones we probably got, 73 or so. The ones we got had the ejector seat, had the pop-up shield, bulletproof shield in the back.
And the guns come out, I think.
And the guns come out. The one just before that one had all that, but it also had revolving license plates.
Oh, cool.
That you put stickers on, and had so the both front and back plates revolved. And it also had these red
wheel cutter
sights,
things, right?
Wheel cutters that pulled out from the center of the tire in the back, and could do lots of damage. So those were my first Bond toys. But I also remember being that kid that was looking around for James Bond, action figures and toys.
Let me guess, you were disappointed.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
We had Flash Gordon the movie. We had James Bond. We had Doctor Who. All these things we were into and we loved that we never got toys for. So the first toys I suppose I can remember seeing, well, twofold. One, I swear, drugstore, rack toy sort of thing. Bond eventually got the rack toy treatment in '84, which I'll let you talk about.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful.
But I remember getting a squirt gun. There's this great publicity shot of Bond, Connery's Bond, 62 in the tuxedo. It's a very, 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 very famous shot, probably the Bond shot, certainly the Connery shot, where he is holding this. It's a Walther, but it's not a Walther PPK. It looks like a Luger, and it's got a long barrel, and he's holding it up next to the side of his face. So he's kind of got his arms folded in front of him, and where his left hand meets his right elbow, he's got it resting on the hand, and then the gun is sort of up next to his face. That gun was made as a squirt gun, not officially. And I swear I had this as a kid, and I got it from the drugstore. And I remember seeing Bond on the packaging or the header card or something.
I'm positive that I've seen that in my catalogs, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan in every spy gun and put it on the Pod Stallions Facebook page.
Oh, great!
But I swear to you, it's a rip. It's what I've seen that too, and it's basically a generic spy who's made to look like Connery. I know I have it somewhere.
Well, that coupled with the corgis would have been my first stuff. But then I do recall seeing the Mego 12-inch figures on the shelf. I remember seeing Roger Moore. I swear I never got him as a kid. I didn't get him, but I swear I saw him at like a Children's Palace type place.
I remember Moonraker because I got the shuttle that year for Christmas. The Moonraker shuttle. And it seemed like all hell broke loose. You got trading cards, and it was all of a sudden Bond merchandise, because I guess it tied into space. I don't remember
it was it was definitely the Star Wars thing, and it was, in fact, I could be wrong about this, because I used to know everything about Bond, and now I know a lot, but I forget things. I think Moonraker was fast-tracked. If you look at Spy Who Loved Me, I think in the end credits it says, it always said in the end credits, James Bond will return.
Right.
It either would say James Bond will return, or it would say he will return and then give you the title of the next one. I believe at the end of Spy Who Loved Me, James Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only.
Oh.
That, I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I think that was the next one that was supposed to happen. Star Wars explodes, and they fast-track Moonraker, which has nothing to do with the book.
Yeah, the book is about a guy, like a scarred World War II guy. World War II guy. I'm 8 years old. A villain who's been like mutilated. Drax is, I think, and he's got a missile. Isn't that like what Moonraker's about? It has nothing to do with going into outer space, as I recall.
Yes, 2x2. The animals went on 2x2.
Yeah. Just Moonraker was like this merchandise explosion. I know the film was a hit, but you all of a sudden you had James Bond model kits, more cars, action figures, gum cards. There's something else I'm missing too. I can't remember. But it really was a big deal. I never saw it in the theater as a kid. In fact, you're going to kill me. I've never seen a Bond film in the theater.
Really?
Yeah, it's just one of those things.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, it really is. And when I think about it, I'm like, really? I've never gone to see a Bond film, but I just never have.
That's interesting.
The Moonraker, the Mego stuff, the thing that really kills me about that Mego stuff is not the stuff that got out. Because it was very limited. And Mego really wanted to make a big deal out of this. And it wasn't... Buyers just didn't think it was going to sell. And we only got 3 action figures in North America. And that was James Bond, Holly, which is, a short of Holly Goodhead, because they're not going to let that happen in toy shelves. And they'd be in the paper the next day. And Drax. But in Italy and the UK, you got 2 extra figures. One was James Bond in a really cool version of the spacesuit from the movie.
Yeah, with a gun, with a laser gun.
With a laser gun, and Jaws.
Yeah.
And Jaws is a really cool and unique contraption in that he's kind of like an Incredible Hulk torso with regular arms, and then they put a magnet in his mouth, the same magnet that Batman and Robin had on their hands and feet.
That's right.
And then I have and I'll put this on the Pod Stallions Facebook page. It's from, the Mega Museum. They were planning much more. They were planning a 3 3/4 inch line. One was a helicopter and a boat, and I think a version of the space shuttle that would all come with a 3 3/4 Bond. Like they really had big plans for this line, and unfortunately, there was no buyer support whatsoever. And in a neat bit of trivia, Mego even actually never paid Eon for the license.
Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, that was something that I helped a guy out with an article once providing some information, and he uncovered that Mego stiffed them.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never, ever knew that. That's kind of fascinating. Interesting. Okay, so we could have had something from Mego. Meantime, we're getting lots of odds and ends coming out of the UK. We're still getting Lone Star items. Lone Star would recycle a lot of stuff, and there was very little they did that was, pound for pound exactly as it was in the film. One of the exceptions was the Moonraker gun. They made a Moonraker laser pistol, but it was a cap gun. Mm-hmm. But it came right out of the film. I mean, it was beautifully done. It's a white die-cast gun with Roger Moore on this box, this packaging, and bits of it, ironically, a year later were used for the Flash Gordon cap gun for the movie. One of the few items made from the film, the Flash Gordon film. This breaks my heart. So much stuff that I had that's gone that I'll never get again. One of the cornerstones of any Bond collection, toy collection. Multiple toy makers in 1965 made the attaché case.
Right. Is that the one with the knife that came out of it?
There's a knife that comes out the side. It really is an amalgam.
What a brutal toy for a child.
Oh, I mean, all the stuff, because it's all caps or bullets getting shot out of it. It was like a Luger type thing it was an amalgam of the attaché that he used in From Russia with Love. The knife comes out the side. There was paper money, a wallet, business cards. The business cards even read International Exports, or Universal Exports, I'm sorry, which is the code name for MI6, for the Secret Service. They answered the phone, Universal Exports. I mean, they even had that kind of detail in this thing. The gun that then came with the stock and a rifle section on the front you could make into a little mini rifle. It's gorgeous. And, if you were to find one of these things boxed and complete, you're looking at, thousands of dollars. I have a real soft spot, as I mentioned before, for attaché type cases. I've since found the Moonraker attaché that was made from Japan. The interior has nothing to do with Bond, really, and there was never one in Moonraker.
Yeah.
The outer flap is like a silver cardboard flap with the beautiful poster artwork. That's another thing about Bond. The movie posters, unparalleled. From I'd say You Only Live Twice right up to the late 70s and Moonraker. Those movie posters were just spectacular. Some of them were just mind-blowing. I have the Moonraker attaché. I have another one from Japan made by Tomy, I think.
Wow.
With Connery in it and a weird gun that comes. It's some really, really neat stuff was made in the world of attachés. One of the pieces that breaks my heart that I miss, I've never seen since, and for For Your Eyes Only, a different toy company called Crescent made a Walther die-cast cap gun, and it came in this For Your Eyes Only box. I've never seen one since the one I got. I also had a promotional, Philips Electronics made a promotional talking or beeping keychain. When you whistled, remember those keychains from the 80s? If you whistled, the thing would beep and you'd find your keys.
Yeah.
They used that as one of his gadgets in The Living Daylights, Dalton's first film. Philips Electronics made promotional keychains, like gold dust, trying to find these things, and I had one. I sold all this stuff. It's heartbreaking. So we've got this is what we're getting for toys. We're getting kind of shafted in the toy department, and then Roger Moore's run is starting to kind of wind down.
Yeah, and the only thing I think that got made in between those periods, it's probably more corgis and little things, but View to a Kill comes out, and I think that's Moore's last film, correct?
Yeah, so we've got, what happened was you've got Octopussy.
Oh, right, the Octopussy.
You got Octopussy, comes out in 83. The two big pieces of merchandise, brilliant pieces. The first one is one of the most beautiful things that Corgi ever made. They've kind of at this point slowed down, like before Octopussy was For Your Eyes Only. The die-cast that came out for that film was the yellow Citroen, Volkswagen type bug that he drives in one sequence going down the hill with the Bond girl. It's gadget. Every Corgi had some kind of little gadget, like the Aston Martin had all that stuff. The Lotus had fins that popped out and missiles that shot up the back. This particular one had a hood that opened.
Yeah.
That was its big gimmick.
Oof.
So they're winding down. For Octopussy, they made a smaller set, which was a little car, the little trailer that hitched behind the car, a fake horse's back end in the back of that, and then the little airplane that he flew in the pre-credit sequence of Octopussy. And the wings folded up, and it went up inside that little trailer. It's a beautiful little piece. It came on a header card rather than a box. So it was a very strange departure for Corgi. And, it was more like a Corgi Jr. When Corgi, I'm rambling here, but when Corgi would make the Aston Martin, the Citroen, the Lotus, they would make the regular version that we picked up, and there was also a Junior. They did it
with pocket money, basically.
Exactly, and then those came on like more of a bubble card. So 83 was Octopussy. 85 is A View to a Kill. Matchbox now gets the rights. They put out a Taxi and a Rolls Royce. Those are the two big cars for A View to a Kill. But in beautiful packaging, though. So at this point, Roger Moore is, God love him, He's not aging as well as Connery.
60 at this time, isn't he? Or 59?
112.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
To a kill. He's he's actually in his early 50s. That's the thing.
Really, I thought he was 59.
I think he was like 53, 54 by the time he did View to a Kill. So his eyeliner is so thick in View to a Kill. He outdoes Tanya Roberts in this thing. He's very much showing his age, and it's time for things to wind down. And it's ironic, of all the periods in the Bond world, to finally get rack toys, official rack toys. They came out in '84 between Octopussy and View to a Kill, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, they are some of my favorite rack toys. I actually remember them because I worked in a variety store that had them, and they amused the hell out of me back then. They are by Imperial Toy, a great favorite rack toy company that's still in business to this day. They're still thriving. They are also the most phoned in, thoughtless pieces of merchandise I think I've ever seen, that's why I opened my book with them, because they're just so bad. I mean, I think there's a parachuting figure, a pair of sunglasses that has a small picture of Roger Moore's face on the card, so he looks like Elton John.
Right, because Imperial and different companies were known for making those, superhero type sunglasses. That's why I love those so much, and I hope you're going to put those in your will and give them back to me at some point. But what I love about that is, you'd have the Spider-Man sunglasses. So you had the cardboard of a drawing of Spider-Man's head, the Batman ones, Superman ones, and then these Roger Moore ones.
Yeah, and then they made ID tags.
And ID tags.
Yeah. And just
they're so badly done. And talk about phoned in. It was like one of them was like a submachine gun. One of them is a 45 automatic that makes noise. Isn't there a watch as well that
most definitely. I mean, it's the Imperial catalog of stock toys, and then they've just put James Bond. There's a skydiver, and
yes.
When they re-released that skydiver for the Delta Force movies, they put it in camo. For this, it is just Roger Moore. It's just a skydiver.
But what's cool, the one kind of cool thing, if I'm not mistaken, the parachute is the Union Jack.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of semi-tie-in to the pre-credit sequence for Spy Who Loved Me. So now we're getting to we're already going long here as usual, but
that's right.
So I'm loving Bond as a kid, and I'm seeing every picture that comes out. I'm getting every Marvel Super Special that comes out.
Yes.
I'm picking up every Starlog poster magazine and tie-in. I'm picking up whatever merchandise I can, because there isn't a lot. Let's be honest, and whatever isn't out there, I'm using other things to be my spy guns and stuff. I remember distinctly, my dad used to get the Sharper Image catalog. This is before they even hit stores, like before the stores started popping up in every shopping mall ever. There was the Sharper Image catalog, and in 1985, this catalog showed up, and I remember him bringing it home to me and said, "Here, you'll like this." And on the cover was a artwork of Roger Moore off of the View to a Kill movie poster, and the whole catalog, was sort of devoted to Bond, and there were tie-ins and stuff. And there's a shot in the movie where he's jimmying a window, breaking into a house or something, and he uses like a Sharper Image credit card or something, so the logo's prominent. I remember it because it had lots of pictures from the film, and I was very excited. A new Bond film. The Duran Duran song was getting a lot of airplay, and let's face it, whatever you think of Duran Duran, it's a good theme. It's one of the better.
That would be my favorite.
It's one of the better themes. And I remember in this catalog, one of the things you could order was a Beretta replica gun. So it couldn't fire as a real gun, but it had blowback, and the bullet would come out, and all that, just like a real gun. And it wasn't officially tied into Bond, but Bond actually used a Beretta in the books before he switched over to the Walther PPK. And I was desperate to get this gun. I forget how much it was, but I never ordered it. It was $14, $15 at the time. Anyway, so this movie's about to come out. I'm very excited, because it's a Bond film. I get the Starlog magazine interview with Roger Moore saying this is probably my last one, yada, yada. And I remember seeing it and just being so disappointed that it was so silly and so ridiculous.
View to a Kill?
View to a Kill. I mean, there's one bit at the beginning where there's a snowmobile chase, and at one point I think he ends up getting a bit of it and turning it into a snowboard. And as he's sort of surfing down the snow in slow motion, they start playing Beach Boys, California.
Oh, yeah.
Which, isn't even as bad as isn't even the worst that it got. The movie before, Octopussy, he is in the jungle at one point being chased, and he swings through the jungle with the full-on Tarzan yell. And ironically, the same year, we got Chewbacca doing the same gag in Return of the Jedi, which is just wrong on so many levels, both of those things. So I'm disappointed, but I know he's done. And then I start reading about the next guy to take over the role. I think I kind of had heard these rumors about Pierce Brosnan.
Oh, yeah. Those were pretty public at the time. And
I was pretty okay with it because I used to watch Remington Steele, but I also kind of thought he's kind of a namby-pamby. Like, he's, I don't want another Roger Moore. So when I finally got word that Timothy Dalton was going to be the guy, I knew very well who Timothy Dalton was because of Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Because he was Prince Baron in Flash Gordon. And I was very excited that he was going to be the guy. And I will never forget, the movie comes out, it's the 25th anniversary, The Living Daylights, the first Timothy Dalton comes out. It might have been on my birthday. Now that I think of it, it might have actually come out on my birthday.
It's kind of
and I see it opening night, and I will never forget coming out of that movie because I went, wow, James Bond is back. This is what it's supposed to be. And I truly believe Timothy Dalton was way ahead of his time. If you look at the Daniel Craig stuff, he pulls a lot of pages out of Dalton's book, and the way he did. Dalton's approach was, let's go right back to the books. He reread every Fleming book and took it very, very seriously. And if you haven't seen Living Daylights, it's this opening where these 3 or 4 00 agents land on the Rock of Gibraltar for this drill, this practice drill with paintball sort of thing for these agents. You don't know which one is Bond. I'll leave it at that. When the camera finally pushes in to Dalton for the first time, you just get this sense of that's the guy. That is James Bond. He took it very seriously. I mean, the script originally was kind of thought with Roger Moore in mind. If he was going to do it, they had to make a lot of alterations. They cut out a lot of the humor because Dalton was very frank about, that's not going to be my bag, guys. Let's do this. Let's make it serious. And in my mind, easily the best Bond film since the 60s, The Living Daylights. His follow-up 2 years later, License to Kill, very, very dark, the darkest the film's ever got.
It's a departure film, really.
Huge departure. And really the only times, because the series, for the most part, the series played it very safe. Yes, you'd have the occasional, bold move. And I do mean bold because Moonraker brought in more money than any Bond film by a mile. But it got a lot of
flack,
fun of because of what it was. And they could have easily said, well, let's take it even further. We're going to make even more bread. But they said, let's bring it back and make a more realistic Bond, which they did. Other than that, the 2 times that they really made a departure and tried something different and risky were on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that's not just because of Lazenby. Lazenby was serviceable. He's not a disaster. Had Connery done it, people could be saying it's the best of the Bond films. The Majesties in '69 and License to Kill in '89, 2 of the best entries in the entire series. But for the most part, in the U.S. especially, audiences stayed away. And it's a shame because they end up being two of the best films in the entire series. But they tried to do something different, and that was very much Dalton's whole thing, was I can't do what Roger Moore is doing. And he realized, he's inheriting it's kind of a thankless role. He's going to be inheriting half the audience that wants him to be Connery, and the other half, actually larger than half, is expecting Roger Moore. And it was hard for a lot of people to swallow, even though Living Daylights did very, very well in the U.S. And also things were changing. By the time you got a License to Kill, you had a summer full of Lethal Weapons and Indiana Joneses and Batmans and all that, and he got lost in the shuffle. Then, of course, there were loads of legal problems, and we didn't get our next Bond for 6 years when we got Brosnan in the role.
Yeah.
And now, of course, with Daniel Craig, I think it's as good as it's ever been with his films.
Well, I can get my wife to watch a James Bond movie now, which
because
I couldn't.
You have a crush on Daniel Craig?
No, I think probably, but also she likes the films. She finds them compelling.
Well, you know what I like about Craig as well. I mean, he's doing a bang up job. I think he's wonderful, and I do think it's very much back to basics Bond. But look, I'm a completely heterosexual male.
Uh-huh.
I'm very secure in such things, but I can look at a handsome chap in a film and say that's a handsome chap right there. Yes. You look at the guys that have played Bond: Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig. Guys like Connery and Dalton and Craig are not. I don't find them like traditionally handsome.
More rugged.
They're rugged. There's something about them. I mean, Daniel Craig is kind of goofy looking by some angles. He's got big ears, and he's kind of got a weird chin, but there's something about them that looks good all cleaned up, and yet you would not want to get, stuck in a dark alley with these guys. Whereas Roger Moore and Brosnan especially, are a little too pretty for the role, shall we say.
I get that. I mean, Brosnan, I thought, pulled it off more than Moore. But, I just wanted to talk, because we were talking about Bond casting. There's two actors that I really like that both got passed over or passed up on Bond. And I would have really been interested to see him. One of them, of course, is the great Patrick McGoohan, who would have been a fantastic Bond.
Well, you know what the problem there was?
He hated the subject matter.
He was an absolute Puritan.
Yeah.
I mean, he had problems with. There are women, female actresses that talk about their episodes of The Prisoner, and how just a kissing scene, how difficult it was to get around a kissing scene because he just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
He never could have been Bond, but it would have been fascinating to see what he would have done. And who's your other one? I got an idea who your other one is.
You may not know this guy, and because he didn't really go on to big things, and sadly he's passed away. But I'm a huge Jerry Anderson fan, and the series that I'm most fascinated with is a show called UFO.
Yes.
And the second in charge of UFO was an actor by the name of Michael Billington.
Oh.
And if you Google Paul Foster UFO, you'll see Billington around the time that they were considering him to replace Connery. And he's a ruggedly handsome guy. He's fantastic on the show, and I really would have liked to have seen him as Bond.
Interesting. My pick is Clive Owen.
Clive Owen, yeah, he was considered, wasn't he?
Well, it was talked about. I'm not sure how far it got with meetings, but I would have loved to. I mean, much as I love Craig, I look at Clive Owen, and I love him. I've seen most of what he's done. Some things better than others. The best thing I think he's ever done is Children of Men. I'm not sure if you've ever seen.
Yeah, that's the post-apocalyptic film. I do like that.
It is not a pick-me-up by any means.
No, it's in fact, it's one of those films that I like, but it's like The Road, where you can't really. My wife recently on Netflix, she's like, "Oh, let's watch The Road again." I was like, "I'd rather stick something in my eye."
It's
and
true.
I like the film.
I know it's tough. It's tough to watch. Children of Men. If anybody out there hasn't seen it, I urge you to see this thing as quickly as possible. It's basically this story, a semi-sci-fi post whatever story, where the population has just stopped. No new pregnancies. No one is being born anymore, and that's it. He is a shell of his former self. This character he plays in in Children of Men. But he is in every single scene of this movie, and he carries the thing, and he has such a weight of the world on his shoulders, and he's just magnificent in it, and you just feel like, he's always thinking on his feet. Two quick things I want to say about Bond. One I forgot to mention, but I'll get back to it. One of the things that's most appealing about the character is that very thing, and when it got too reliant on gadgets, it started to lose some of that appeal or that charm. He's a smart guy. He's a blunt instrument, the way Fleming described him. Mm-hmm. He's there to do a job. But if he doesn't have, the laser watch that's going to cut through the glass or whatever, there's a great bit. I'll give you the best example. One of the best examples I can think of in a mediocre outing is Live and Let Die. They bring him out to that little island where the alligators are about to come and eat him. He's got no means of escape, and so he runs across the top of the alligators, jumps on their heads, and gets over to the shore, so to speak.
Yeah,
and that's to me who he is. He's always thinking.
He's Batman, basically.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that opening chase in Casino Royale is a great example of that. He's this guy that he's chasing that's doing all the parkour stuff. Mm-hmm. He's slimmer than Bond, he's faster than him, and he's doing all these fancy moves that Bond can't do. So every step of the way in that chase, if you rewatch it, Bond is taking a shortcut. If the guy is climbing the thing, Bond is punching through the plaster, or whatever. He's constantly surveying whatever's around him and improvising and using his brain and his wits, and that's one of the coolest things about the character, I think. The other thing I forgot to mention about toys was an item that was made for Octopussy. There were two items, the Corgi thing, the other one, genius item. Do you recall one of the bad guys, the henchman, had this weapon in Octopussy that was a spin saw?
Yeah, it's on it's like on a string, and you like shoot it off and it cuts people's heads off, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and oddly somebody made a toy of that. I remember that.
And I forget the name of the company, but it's the weirdest thing because it was such an awkward toy. It was put on a sort of a bubble card, and they were so delicate. If you tried to find one today, there are very few that exist that aren't like coming off of the card or broken in some way. And I had one, and it's called the Octopussy Spin Saw. It's so weird because
it's by Wembley.
Webley, yes.
Yeah, because when I wrote an article for Topless Robot, the top 5 best and the top 5 worst James Bond toys, and I surveyed a bunch of collectors, yourself and Will Frost in the UK and another guy, and all three of you said seek out this spin saw thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And the other awfulness that you guys talked about was the exclusive premiere figures. And the Imperial toys. Like they're just such hacky toys. And I mean, like there's been some genius James Bond toys, and you've elaborated on a lot of them, but there is some real schlock out there.
But it's funny because and I've said this 1,000 times. I'm going to repeat something that I just said a couple episodes ago on Geek Shall Inherit again, because I was riffing on those exclusive premiere. We finally get something that sort of semi-resembles an action figure line, a true action figure line for James Bond. And that's what we got.
Well, and you know what? I think anyone who was a fan of something that exclusive premiere got could say that. If you were a Dukes of Hazzard fan or,
Yeah, but okay, absolutely. But Dukes of Hazzard, we got.
Gilligan's Island. Nobody wanted that.
Nobody was clamoring for Gilligan's Island. It's kind of cool that we finally got a Bogart and a Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca. Weird, but it's nice.
If you're a fan of Gunsmoke or Wild Wild West, and there are a lot of fans of Wild Wild West.
I actually have the James West.
It's too bad it isn't a nicer figure.
Oh, there's a look at you. We brought it back around to that. There's a great example of how the spy genre influenced more stuff in television. There was something that that was a beautiful hybrid of a Western and the spy genre to make
and a little bit of Batman
series
in there too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was
Wild West is
brilliant series.
I didn't get that show as a kid, but and to segue this beautifully, something I forgot to mention. One of my favorite spy TV shows of all time, A Man Called Sloane, which also starred Robert Conrad, and that was a Quinn. It was the last Quinn Martin production.
A Quinn Martin production.
Yeah, and it was a 1979 spy series. It was a bit of a take on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., James Bond, but it was written by a first grader, I think. Like when I was 8 and watching that, it was the smartest show I'd ever seen in my life.
Sure.
When I found it, and I had to seek this thing out, I mean, I had to pay a guy and get bootlegs. It's stupid, and I love it. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I mean, the first episode is Roddy McDowall is taking over the world with androids. The next one is Robert Culp has an army of female assassins. You know, they're very dopey.
Yeah, anyone that was ever a guest star in any show from
Yes.
in that thing. You know, I love it. I remember even the title as a kid, just thinking the title was kind of A Man Called Sloane. We'll continue. You know, and Conrad was such a douchebag at that point because we knew him from the Battle of the Network Stars and the battery commercials and all that. And you thought, you're just such a tool. You know, I loved him because I loved the Wild Wild West. Let's wrap this up real quick with two quick things. One, before I die, I mean, this little dream I had of starting a toy company, you know, the old joke, the old George Harrison joke about why did you finance Life of Brian when everybody walked away? The old joke was, I just wanted to see
the movie. Yeah.
I started this thing because I wanted to get these toys eventually that no one else was making because I wanted them for my shelf. And so now we're to the point, you know, where people are coming to us. And I do start to kind of step back and look at our licenses and go, well, what's left? You know, like we've got Star Trek, we've got Doctor Who, you know, something that I grew up with, you know, never dreaming in a billion years we'd be having these conversations and opening up new toys. I just, you know, got some today that I'm like, oh my God, I've got a Scaroth in my hand. And that's a toy, by the way.
Yes.
Anyway.
You know, I'm glad you described it as a toy and not a one-eyed thing because people would still be confused.
Anyway, someday, if it's not going to be us, and I don't know how we could because I can just imagine what a nightmare would be. Please, someone out there, give us an official James Bond toy line. We even had the closest we got, Hasbro. There was an animated series in the early 90s called James Bond Jr.
I've forgotten that.
A whole line of action figures and vehicles, and they were terrible, and the show was awful.
Wasn't Odd Job dressed like Run DMC?
Yes. And there was a Dr. No and some other characters. The one cool thing that toy line did do was a fake CD player. You could pull the plastic CD out and use it as like a frisbee weapon, a spin saw kind of thing, and a cap gun, an actual pistol, popped out of the CD thing. And it was very similar to something that would have been done in the 60s. It was shocking. So someone, please, I'm praying every night, somebody get the Bond license and give us a 3 3/4 inch action figure range with vehicles and play sets and villains and girls, every incarnation of Bond. Just the mind reels at the possibilities. Okay, so here we're wrapping it up.
Well, let's finish up with our favorites.
Yes,
and then go from there.
Around here. We'll go back and forth. All right, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Favorite Bond theme?
View to a Kill.
All right.
I thought you'd ride me for that, but
hell no. That's in my top
that
5.
Song. I'm not even the world's biggest Duran Duran fan.
That's in my top 5.
Okay, you?
Mine has got to be. It's got to be Live and Let Die because of McCartney. But I'll tell you, right next to it, and maybe neck and neck, is the theme, the instrumental theme on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
No way.
Yeah, it is a genius 4 minutes of brilliance from John Barry.
If I had a second one, it would be the Casino Royale. Was it
Chris Cornell.
Chris Cornell, I think that's awesome.
And I do love the Adele. I mean, I would say.
Oh, the Adele song. Nothing against that.
That's great. And Thunderball, the Tom Jones Thunderball, is genius. And You Only Live Twice is a beautiful piece of music. I could go on, but those are mine. Favorite Bond.
Favorite Bond? I have to go with Connery. First Bond. I like I don't turn a Bond off, but sure. I think the connection with Connery is also to the time when it was most suitable. You know what I mean? Like the Cold War's over now.
Yeah.
And all that stuff, you know, we know we have cell phones now, and that was the real epitome of cool to me. And he could smoke and drink, for God's sake.
Well, then on that note, what would you can you pick a favorite picture?
A favorite
Bond film?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Goldfinger because it's the first one I saw, but I love Thunderball too.
Very good.
How about
I'm gonna have to say Connery, and I'm gonna say From Russia with Love, because I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's the series was starting to hit its stride. You know, ticking all the boxes. He looks perfect. He looks better than he did in any of the other films ever. He's just the epitome of cool in that film. And it's got a very mod sort of sensibility to it. That's probably my favorite of the films. But my top 5 have got to be like From Russia with Love, Living Daylights, Spy Who Loved Me. Skyfall might even be in there. I think it's so good. And Majesties.
Skyfall is I really like Skyfall.
I would put Majesties in there. Favorite Bond girl?
Okay, you're gonna you know me, right? You
Sure.
know I'm a bit of a train wreck. I absolutely love Christmas Jones, Dr. Christmas Jones, because it's just like somebody actually said, "Let's get Denise Richards to play a nuclear scientist," and it happened, and it's just. I think it's just the Schadenfreude. I just really enjoy how ridiculous it is. I know there's sexier. I know there's much better actresses.
Well, on that note, I'm gonna have to go for Pussy Galore for about a dozen reasons.
Yep.
All
better than mine.
The absurdity, the name, the fact that Honor Blackman was in the Avengers. I'll tell you the runner-up though, same film. Would be Jill Masterson, Shirley Eaton, the famous Bond girl that got painted gold.
Yeah,
was just ridiculously stunning in that film. So she might be right up there. I also have a real soft spot for Carrie Lowell, who Licensed to Kill, who ended up for years being on. One of the Law and Order. She was one of the lawyers in Law and Order, and married to Richard Gere happily. And how about what should we say? If Bond, would you have a favorite Bond toy? Could you pick a toy?
I would have to go with my childhood Aston Martin because it was my only childhood Bond toy. I also have a soft spot for the Mego Jaws figure, even though I don't own one.
I'm gonna have to say. I'm going to have to say the Aston Martin, and I'm talking about the 73 Aston Martin with the
wheel cutters?
Wheel cutters and the license plates. And I'm going to have to go with the multiple toy makers attaché because it is just a piece of brilliance.
That is a cool toy.
And it epitomizes 60s spy craze, a briefcase that has all kinds of weapons and stuff in it, basically. And then finally, should we say, do we have a favorite villain?
Yeah, I would go with the Donald Pleasance Blofeld.
Nice.
Classic. I know it's the inspiration for Dr. Evil. But, as a kid, he's got a volcano fortress in the You Only Live Twice. And just on a side note, that's the only Bond film I own because I lucked out. You ever had that? You rent a movie, and then the video store's gone out of business by the time you got to return it?
No.
Yeah, that happened to me a lot, but it would always be something I didn't want to keep.
That's funny.
And it was, I didn't return it because the guy was gone. He had just cleared out in the middle of the night. And
nice score.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go with Jonathan Pryce. I'm kidding.
Okay. That's a he was a Brosnan villain, right?
Yeah, from Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say, wow.
Favorite villain? I'm going to have to say probably Goldfinger. It's got to be Goldfinger couple of reasons, real quick, and we'll wrap this up. A guy called Gert Frobe, who most people will also know from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, played Goldfinger, claimed, that he spoke fluent English, wasn't going to be a problem. Showed up on set, no one could understand a word the man said. He's German. So his voice, actually, this is a fairly common practice, especially in the 60s. A lot of the villains, they're the actors, because they tried to get this international cast and audience kind of going. Their voices were dubbed in. So Adolfo Celli, who played Largo in Thunderball, his was so was Goldfinger. But one of the most famous lines in all of Bond is Bond thinking with his wits, the laser beam going up his crotch. He's about to get split in half on that table in Goldfinger, and he says, "Do you expect to talk, Goldfinger?" And Goldfinger says, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." One of the greatest exchanges in all the Bond films.
Yeah, and I've actually used that to comedic effect on Plaid Stallions. I use a lot of Bond analogies because a lot of the fashion stuff people look like Bond villains.
One of my favorites is in You Only Live Twice, when he's drinking sake and the guy says, "Oh, you like sake?" And he's, "Oh no, I like sake, especially when it's served at the correct temperature, 98 degrees Fahrenheit, like this is." He knows the temperature that sake should be served at. He's a genius.
Yeah.
So as you can see, everybody, we love Bond. We love spy movies. We've as usual, try to cover about 17 bases in one episode. And apologies for that going a little long. But you know what? That's a lot of free entertainment. So eat it up.
Right. That's a lot of spying for you.
That's right. And anybody wants to get a Kickstarter going to buy us spy toys, we are open to that. Please send them all to Brian, and he can send them to me.
And I should probably watch some Bond films again.
Yeah, if you need a short list, I'll send you one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for calling. I'm glad we could do this.
And thanks to everybody for listening.
And I hope you enjoyed it. And get out and watch some Bond if you haven't seen any.
And we'll talk to you real soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you later.